Good evening, everyone, and welcome to what's going to be a fantastic event this evening. We've actually got over 400 people tuned in from around Australia. It's fantastic to have a live audience here, and welcome everyone that's joining us face-to-face in Adelaide, and welcome to everyone online as well. My name's Chris Kirk. I have the privilege of operating Stone & Chalk and our space programs here in South Australia, and tonight is part of a monthly series that Stone & Chalk's running around some of the world's most pressing challenges. And the theme tonight is around the future of Australia's space industry and Deeptech entrepreneurship. Before I introduce our incredible speakers, I will just acknowledge that the land we meet on tonight is the traditional land of the Kaurna people. We pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. And I'll also tell you a little bit about Stone & Chalk, and we'll play a short video just to really highlight Stone & Chalk's mission, which is to help accelerate Australia's transition to a sustainable tech-driven economy.
It all starts with a big idea, where relentless bravery and curiosity reside. Ideas that are driving real change, purpose-driven growth, and positive impact. Where brilliant minds and passionate entrepreneurialism converge, and deep human connections form. At Stone & Chalk, we are founder first, sustainable, not-for-profit, and Australia-wide. With the visionaries, the creators, the brave and the bold, our startups, scale-ups and corporates don't just make moves in the industry. Together, we're putting Australian emerging tech innovation on the map. To succeed, real change makers need more than just guidance and networks. They need to be supported every step of their journey by a curated community of founders, mentors, investors, corporates, governments and collaborators. Together, we're redefining how innovation should be supported in order to thrive. It all starts with your big idea. Join the next gen of change makers and make your mark with the largest innovation community in Australia. At Stone & Chalk, together we ideate, innovate, impact.
We've been around since 2015, and one of the fantastic things that we're doing is helping really drive forward future industries in Australia, and one of the industries that we're really excited about is the space industry. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our three brilliant speakers, starting with Catherine, Dr. Catherine Grace, who works with the South Australian Space Industry Centre and is an internationally respected thought leader in space and defence. We also have Alyssa from Osius, and I learnt the backstory of Osius tonight, and we might hear a little bit about that in a second. But Osius is a fantastic company. Show of hands, who here has heard of Osius? Well, you'll all know about Osius tonight. Really impressive, combining artificial intelligence and information from satellites to help organisations minimise and manage their environmental footprint. And then we have Ben Tett, who has a fantastic job title, General Manager of Launch and Operations for Equatorial Launch Australia. So we'll hear from each of these distinguished speakers in a moment. But first, I might just do a quick pulse check. Who here tuned in this morning for what was a pretty incredible moment in humanity's history? NASA crashing a spacecraft into an asteroid at 14,000 miles an hour. Put your hand up for me if you watched that on YouTube. We've got about 80% of the room. That's incredible. I will admit, I actually didn't even know it was happening. I canvassed the space community over the last week. I was getting quite stressed about tonight and just trying to keep up with the pace of what is happening in space. And I said, make sure you tell me everything I need to know about what's happening. And I got the Artemis launch, humanity going back to the moon, got a whole host of things. And then I was like, geez, how did I miss this incredible spacecraft the size of a vending machine getting launched at 14,000 miles an hour into basically the equivalent of an AFL field and testing really what is the first line of defence for a catastrophic event. So incredible moment, which for me really painted a couple of things. One was the ability of the space industry like no other to really galvanise like collective effort of humanity. And then two, just the sheer scale and pace of what is happening at the moment in the space industry. And that really, I think, is a good segue for the conversation tonight. I think certainly when you pick up the paper, and many of you would see, you almost can't go a day now without seeing an announcement in the space industry. It's often hard to draw relevance back to, why does that matter for me as an Australian or as a business owner? And yeah, I think that one of the first topics I'd love to elaborate on, and maybe we start with you, Catherine, is just why should the audience, the 400 people on the call today and the average Australian, not just take notice of incredible things that are happening in space, but draw relevance back to them and quite frankly care about what's happening in the space industry?
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Chris. Before I begin, I'm just going to take a moment to also acknowledge that we meet on the land of the Kaurna people. I would like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and extend that respect to all First Nations people with us in the room today and in the audience. Why does space matter? Why does space matter to us on a daily basis? Why should it matter to industry? And it's a really good question, and I think you touched on the answer, Chris, just in what you said. It's not a day goes by in the newspaper when you can't see a certain event, a certain industry, a certain milestone being reached. Sorry, I had a little bit of stage fright, but I just want to, for a bit of context, I'll give you my position, what we do, and why that actually matters and why space matters. So the South Australian Space Industry Centre is a South Australian government economic development agency. And our role here and our purpose is to ensure the growth of this sector. Why is it a priority? Well, space is actually a priority because not only do the technologies that we develop and the blue sky R&D matter, but there's actually on-Earth resources. Every day, your everyday technology is completely related to space. And everyone's heard the story. Yes, my banking, yes, my GPS, yes, my technology, but it's actually broader than that. Everything from space medicine, human space flight, plants in space, rockets. We talk about, it's exactly actually what you're doing, Alyssa, AI, deep thinking, deep tech. So launch is absolutely critical to get up there and to have part of that, but it's actually that's much better. It's the on-Earth applications and the spin-out in technologies. The sector is growing phenomenally, and we've all heard
I feel like that's interesting because you hear a lot of commentary about how critical space technology is for people's lives, but maybe just a quick show of hands and we'll relay it online. Like, who here feels like the space industry and space technology is directly impacting their role today? Put your hand up. Okay, maybe, that's actually a surprising number, maybe 70%. Who here feels like it's going to impact their role in the next 3 years? Almost 100%, that's the correct answer, well done. I had a conversation with Alyssa, which I thought was really interesting yesterday, when you were challenging me around try and live a day without using space technology. Can you elaborate on that?
I'll try. If I can get the mic working. Oh, there we are. Yes, I'll give that a go. Yes, absolutely. I think that's one thing that we all try to point at something that is related to space, and we immediately think, when we think of space, we think let's look at the stars and astronomy and let's have a look up. But really what's happening is what's happening all around us. It's really hard to go a day without leaning on space technology right now, from navigating around the city and catching the Uber, and through to communicating and with family and friends all across the globe. So I think it's actually harder now to live without space already, let alone in 3, 5, 10 years, which is really exciting. And then there's also the deep tech side that's happening too, where we're actually now in a position where we're changing the way we can do business here on Earth as well, which is really exciting.
I've been really surprised operating the Space Hub here in South Australia at just how exciting it is when you bring space-enabled data and technology and apply that to other industries. And I think that's a really interesting topic to talk about tonight. And people in the space industry constantly remind me that the opportunity is just as exciting to use space data as it is to launch things in the sky. But let's be frank, launching stuff in the sky is really freaking exciting. And so on that note, I wanted to pick your brain, Ben. For those that don't know Ben, he's quite understated. He has a very long LinkedIn profile, and he actually has, like, typical space engineer buried the lead story, which is nowhere on his LinkedIn profile if you stalk him later, that ELA actually launched 3 rockets earlier this year. Yeah. And so, just tell us, congratulations for starters, but tell us about that experience. Like, why did you launch 3 rockets and what's next?
Thanks. I guess it's not on LinkedIn yet, is it? That's all right. We launched, so NASA has been looking to come back to Australia and do some scientific experiments of the Southern Hemisphere for quite a long time. We previously used to go through the Wimmera Range, and that's fairly constrained right now, and will be for quite a while. And so they were very eager, as Scott Wallace founded the business in 2015, coincided with the time that NASA was ready to kick off and come back with a few universities, University of Wisconsin, Colorado, and that led into me finding my way into ELA through a network and starting last year and rapidly trying to drive a program of construction up on site in the middle of East Arnhem near Nhulunbuy in Northern Territory, and really ready the site and a launch pad and the infrastructure for NASA to come over and do these 3 experiments. And that went really well. It was 3 launches within 15 days, so it's quite tight. It's a testament to, I think, the amount of what we can achieve with collaboration in Australia when we're focused and motivated and have great purpose. Agencies like CASA, ASA, Air Services, all the local companies all came together and just, yeah, you want us to help you launch some rockets? Of course, we'll lift heaven and earth to do that, and that's what happened. And we were able to significantly launch a day early on the final launch, which I hadn't realized, but NASA said they'd never done that before, because they're normally, it's just off the table. And it just shows that it's a solution that we put into place as an innovation almost here without even thinking about it, because it just seemed practical and the agency were willing to support that. The big tangible benefit was the amount of money we spent in the area and the amount of money NASA brought over to that area, and the local jobs that it's creating up there.
So for a non-space audience, help us understand, why do we actually need to launch rockets from Australia?
I think it gives us one, ease of access, so we don't have to take our stuff overseas to launch from overseas. We have a geographical benefit in the political stability that makes us very attractive. We have proximity to the equator where we are, and other spaceports in Australia where have flying over oceans all give us an amazing advantage for different orbits for less money and to take greater payloads with a low population. So it's a massive position that we can take into a market that's growing very fast, faster than the capacity of these spaceports in the States. And so hence why we're driving this really quickly, is trying to capture some of that market that's moving and doesn't have anywhere to launch easily in the States.
Yeah, that's something that certainly strikes me, and I think something that a lot of people underappreciate is just how quickly this market is moving. Any guesses as to the rate of growth of the space industry, the annual compounded growth over the next 10 years? No one's game to yell it out in the audience. Some reports put it, depending on the sector in the space industry that you look at, over 55% compounded year on year, and a $1 trillion industry by 2030. KPMG put out a great bit of work recently, I think it was called 2030, 30 Voices in the Space Industry, where they were interviewing people from the Australian space community around what the future could look like. And it had some really incredible and quite striking claims around what the Australian space industry could look like then. And one that really struck me, which I'm not sure I believe, actually I'll be interested in the opinion of the three of you, was that by 2030, Australians will likely know someone that has been in space. So maybe quick true or false? True or false? You're approaching this like a space engineer doing, I'm seeing beautiful mind image of how many rockets, ELA.
Give us the year that happens.
Give us the year then, if it's not 2030.
Oh, I think in the next 20 years. 20
years?
Yeah, I'm more like 2035.
Okay.
I'm going to play the game when you say, what do you mean know somebody? What do you mean know somebody that's been in space?
Might...
So Adelaide, Australia,
yeah.
And this is I'm getting a bit of an echo, sorry. And this is a kudos to Australia, and specifically about Adelaide, and those of you who are joining online, next time try to come in person to Adelaide, because it's 6 degrees of separation. The one thing that really makes Australia unique, and it's a powerful unique, especially for something like the space ecosystem, is the connectivity. You can have an event like this tonight and reach a great audience. Are we going to know somebody that's in space or been in space? The rate of growth is absolutely yes, without a doubt.
So the verdict is Catherine will know someone and the rest of us are waiting 20 years. But still really impressive, I think, to think about that as becoming a reality. And you look at the boldness of the private sector and you look at just the rate of the ambition of companies like SpaceX and others, it's really quite astounding. But I guess to put it back on you, maybe we don't know someone that's been in space in the next 10 years, but what could the Australian space industry realistically look like? Ben, what are your thoughts?
I think we'll be high cadence launches on our own soil for local and international science or commercial ventures. And I think that is very achievable within 5 to 10 years. Human space flight's a bit challenging. I think that's a longer game, but I think the next 2 to 3 years we'll see that locally. And I just think that lure of international money and business coming from it to us to make use of that strategic advantage is huge.
Yeah, space investment represented less than 2% of venture capital last year, so it's still a long way to go, but it is really exciting to hear that. What about from your perspective, Alyssa? You're thinking about space data in the context of solving some really interesting challenges. Maybe tell us a little bit about OSIUS and what you're doing, and then how you can see easier, cheaper, faster, more accessible space playing out from an Australian economy perspective.
Yeah, so I actually founded OSIUS in 2014, before there was a space agency, before space had this community than it does today, that's for sure. We had very limited access to satellite technology, but I could see that this tsunami of data was coming and that businesses were going to need to be set up to no longer be able to take an image off a satellite, look at it, figure out what's going on, and then report on it. The data would come too fast for us to have humans to be able to do that. And again, in Australia, we didn't have the population even or the skill sets to at that scale. At that point, I'd spent 10 years in R&D and worked with lots of different sensors. And while I was in research, the technology was ready now to rely on and to be able to make business decisions from. We didn't have to wait another 10 or 15 years for any more capability. We could do that now. So I started OSIUS to really bring space technology to businesses to solve everyday problems that they had, particularly around the environment. And what we've seen, we had to start out rather bespoke, so bespoke solutions, but we learned a lot around the market in that time. And at the same time, in parallel, more satellites were going up, Planet launched, cloud technologies became accessible to everyone. And I did have startups in different accelerators that we were a part of that were accessing AI on the cloud, and I'm like, how do you afford that? And I'm like, find out they only had to do one data stream with one variable and look for a switch, and I'm like, oh, we've got like 200 variables in an array, and what are we going to do? Just even being able to get the volume of data into the cloud was also a challenge, but we've beaten that now, and I think that's what's really exciting in just what we've achieved in the last little while to enable business, both Earth observation businesses to flourish and also create impact for big enterprises and other businesses out there across agriculture, mining, resources, oil and gas, utilities, a whole range. And I think that's the other major thing with space is that it can have impact across so many different markets. It's not just a one-for-one, and it's not just put a satellite up there and just deal with one thing. It can have impact in so many.
So, Catherine, I can see you nodding very enthusiastically. The Australian Space Agency set some ambitions around having 20,000 Australians working in space industry and tripling the size of the industry, etc. And certainly in South Australia, you're working closely with teams in many of the verticals that Alyssa just talked about. What are your predictions around or hopes for a really vibrant space industry in Australia?
I couldn't help but nod just because everything that was being said was absolute music to my ears, and I'm hoping that with the audience as well. So the original question was, where do you see the industry going and how do you predict it in the next few years? And I'd say exactly like this, but expanded. So we've got an organization like Stone and Chalk supporting entrepreneurship and growth and development in the area. We've got launch and satellites, which is part of the critical infrastructure that will only grow as we, especially in South Australia, support new space with small mini mesh, but also with defence coming on board and their needs and really putting that sovereign capability. Then we've got fantastic organizations like yours understanding the data piece. And then you mentioned one of my favorites is that space really is this horizontal and cuts across sectors. And this is where Australia can play to its strengths, and I really see the industry growing, and that is in the cross sectors. So things like energy and mining. We've got an amazing South Australian company that does satellites. I don't know if I'm allowed to name names, but for example, Fleet Space and the great work they're doing. So they're going to use IoT and data and help to use IoT data to do mineral finding. Easy. Easy for the intelligent, smart people on board, but that's just where it's progressing. And then this is what I hope we're going to see. So it's going to be from the question to how does space affect your life on the day to everybody seeing the effects of space and space-enabled technology in the day-to-day.
Great. So huge industry, massive opportunity for many sectors across Australia. But then I think a contrast or a stark reality that creating a deep tech company is bloody hard. It's hard anywhere. It's particularly hard in Australia where you need access to customers, you need access to capital, you need access to talent. I'm interested in ELA's story, Ben. Talk us through the journey of having a bold vision like we want to launch rockets from Australia and making that a reality. And maybe unpack for us a little bit about what you hope to see exist as support mechanisms in Australia to support really inspirational and incredible companies like yourself to not just launch, but have the courage to actually grow and succeed in Australia.
Yeah, sure. Scott Wallace was the founder and had the vision to enable that launch from the Northern Territory. He worked through the military and drew some seeds of that thinking from early work at Woomera, when we used to work with the UK on the rocket facilities. They identified that Australia is a great place to launch rockets with low population density and vast distances. So pulling those threads together, he founded the concept up in the Northern Territory and put in place the conversation up there with the local traditional owner groups and brought everybody on board with that concept. And then that kind of translated, obviously, with a launch client, pardon the pun, being NASA coming together, a government that stepped in and took some risk on to invest into the company. I think what would help all of us potentially as entrepreneurs and companies like ourselves go forward is that different avenues of funding support us in these early stages where it's quite difficult to get venture capitalist money in this country compared to the pools in overseas. Things like guaranteed contracts from the government or defense that give us some confidence to move forward in some of our plans, hiring plans and whatever they may be, will just go a long way to just get us through those early ways where it's watching your balance run out quickly and then you stop starting a lot. If you get some of those contracts coming in, whether it's grants or contracts, I think it'll be quite helpful.
Alyssa, I detected some jealousy before when you were talking about your journey and almost the life of an entrepreneur now, like almost some sentiment of you guys, you young'uns have got it easy. But if you were reflecting on, or if you were an entrepreneur in the room or online today, starting a business now, well, what would you do differently? And what would your advice be for someone that maybe with your background is looking at space without the traditional space domain expertise, but going, hey, intuitively, there could be some really interesting opportunities here?
Yeah, there's a few elements to that question, and one point I wanted to raise today as well was that typically when I was starting the business and my peers globally were starting businesses, we came from research backgrounds typically, because that's where we all could have jobs previously. Again, there wasn't really a space industry for us to work privately in. But now I actually see that what makes Earth observation so powerful is that interpretation piece, and that's where different domain experts can come in. And so I actually think a lot of the startup community and entrepreneurs that we're going to start seeing are not necessarily going to be coming from space or science backgrounds even, or physics or maths. They might actually come from property, real estate. They might come from working on a mine site and wanting to do something better. So I think our community from a non-space perspective can have a really far reach as to where you could start a business up from. And again, huge opportunity there. But I have an environmental background, environmental science, and I actually viewed it as, well, I was down on the reefs outside of Wollongong looking at crabs and starfish and trying to look at the biodiversity, and I'm like on this one rocky headland with a differential GPS backpack on, going around the headland and trying to map it all out. And I was like, there's got to be a better way. And then I stumbled on satellite. I'm like, we can see so much instantly from there, and we can take this broader view. So I actually came at it from a domain expertise that wanted to make it better and easier to do my job and grow from there. So I think there's lots of opportunities to come into the space industry from a lot of different pathways, which is really exciting.
So technology is more accessible than ever, which is fantastic. We're seeing more and more non-space people think about space as an opportunity, which is fantastic. And I'm going to make you tell the story that you told me just before this, which was how ELA found their latest recruit, but we'll circle back to that one. Because we were having a conversation about, quite frankly, like the struggles of deep tech entrepreneurship. And one of the biggest challenges for any deep tech company, but certainly those in Australia, is access to customers. If you're launching rockets, who are your customers? And very often those customers are government or government related. And I guess, Catherine, from you, I'd be really interested in how the government, whether it's wearing a South Australian lens or an Australian lens, is thinking about helping to seed and support companies when they're in these really formative stages, and often where they rely on supporting either defence or other kind of government use.
Perfect segue. And Alyssa, I was going to say, you should just move to South Australia. Look at the success ELA has had. Caveat, your little South Australian hat on. But again, my organisation that I work for is for economic development. And we take pride in actually supporting startups through a myriad of opportunities. So one of them that we do support, which I think is excellent, and I hope your organisation can participate, is a gravity challenge. We've got a great t-shirt here on Stone and Chalk. I wish everyone who's online, you got to come down. The ecosystem is brilliant and what I'm pointing to. But you get organizations who have problems, real world problems, who need them solved. who don't realize, like yourself, that space can solve them. So whether it's potholes on roads, Australia is a really big country. How do we look at roads? Similar to how you did your sciences. Oh, we'll send somebody out, drive thousands of miles. There's a better way to solve this, cheaper, easier, faster. We have the technology, we have the expertise here in Australia, we need to apply it. And when you get your customer base here, because of how Australia is geographically located, politically stable, our language base, that is exportable content. And that's what we want to do, make sure that it's homegrown, that we have the knowledge, but is exportable. So Gravity Challenge is a great one. Even just the power lines in countries that do have snow, we don't have snow. How do we solve it? Where's the weak point? Or even here with trees growing, where do we need to cut the trees? Would you believe that in certain countries and in certain states, how much money is spent monitoring trees with humans going around to say, do we need to cut this tree? You have to pay an arborist, you have to have it monitored, growth patterns, as opposed to using different and enable technology and using our smarts to do. So the South Australian government does sponsor those challenges. We also sponsor startups. So there's ICC Venture Catalyst, which is a spin-out program where you have a good idea, you compete. We get international organizations competing to be here, to be supported, to grow, to learn. There's Stone and Chalk, which we do support, does amazing things. And we'll speak about federal government, but one of the, I think, really big pieces that the ASA did was announce a national mission, right? And that, as you mentioned, Ben, is going to be those contracts that provide that sustainability to not have the ebbs and flows, but something that we can work towards.
So talk to us about that, Ben. One of the things you often hear from government, and as an entrepreneur can be really difficult to navigate, is this vast world of opportunity being like all of space, and space can solve every problem known to humanity, right? And so for entrepreneurs in the room, they go, well, that's a tricky one to narrow down. Where do we actually focus? And then you contrast that with the stark reality that Australia is, a little over 1% of the global space industry, and competition is fierce in this space. Companies are well funded. Yes, there's lots of opportunity, but that window of opportunity is quickly diminishing. Yeah, I'd be interested from your perspective. Maybe you can share a little bit of insight into what Catherine alluded to around some of the Australian government's leadership to help provide more sustainable pathways for teams. And then just even your advice, quite frankly, around as an entrepreneur or a business thinking about where do I start, what's the kind of framing of reference that you use?
Sure. Yeah, I think pleasingly to see the Australian Space Agency has started up in the last few years. They're working on a cohesive space strategy. That strategy is also then being weaved together with alignment to the defence space strategy. And those things start to then allow the cascade of prioritization and focus areas that create programs of change. And I think those programs of change are where entrepreneurs start to look at as, we don't have the answers in those programs of change, but they're ambitious objectives that we should try and reach. I think that's where you create that drive for innovation, and entrepreneurs can lean into those gaps and help solve that. I think as those programs are created, if you can pull down some of those key contracts that within those programs may need international people to come over, we need to help de-risk that for those people. And when we look at our clients, particularly in the US, and the perception is that Australia's too far and too hard. And so we look at every angle to that and say, how do we remove that perception firstly, and then secondly, if it is a challenge, how do we reduce the cost and make it easy for you? And some of that sometimes may need that support from a defence or government contract that de-risks that for that entity, partnered with the state or local support, and obviously your own private investment. I think with those things combined, it just makes that project come to life. Otherwise, it becomes quite challenging and time slips. So that's where, and we're obviously chasing grants is another angle to support that. But grants sometimes are less easy to pull the money down quickly, where you may need that as a startup.
Alyssa, you talked about Australia really thinking about how we play to its strengths, and obviously a big strength is sustainability and climate. We've got some fantastic innovators all around Australia thinking about how we help support the world's transition to net zero, for example. And I'd be interested from your perspective, one, to unpack a little bit more about what the kind of mission and vision of your company is, but also what are you seeing out in the market as opportunities where you go, gee, this is a really ripe opportunity for Australia to seize the day around really playing to our competitive strengths in those spaces?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, with the sustainability piece, so OSIUS has built a nationally consistent 3D model of vegetation, and we can cut through the vegetation structure from the ground to the top of the canopy every 10 centimetres. And that's the technical description of the product, but what does it actually do? So it's having a huge impact in the sustainability space, because for the first time, we at Osius know Australia's carbon potential. We know the carbon opportunities. Where can we actually plant more trees that are going to grow quickly to actually reach international and local goals around sustainability and achieving net zero. Some of the, just to come in on the environmental applications a bit more, so there's been a lot of commitments globally around meeting net zero targets, and one of the ways to do that is to plant more trees. Another, you can also achieve that by lowering your actual footprint as well. So getting a handle of what is your actual disturbance footprint, like your development footprint, versus what is being put back into the ground to grow. We can actually calculate that from space now. And so we can actually start to report on by any company, and actually even look at supply chains around impacts for deforestation. But there's also a really good story too around what progress is being made to actually restore the earth. And I think that, and that's where we're focusing on Australia first and then going global from there. But it's a really, so our products are all aligned to different types of vegetation characteristics and how we can monitor them. We're also focused on looking at anomaly detection and events. So what events can actually threaten companies to meet their goals? If you have invested in an area in natural capital to actually plant or secure an area, how do you actually know that isn't being affected by floods, fire, it isn't being selectively logged or whatnot? So we can persistently monitor sites, or we can also look at the sum total across Australia as well. And it's phenomenal technology that we're even able to extract this information out of satellite.
I'm excited and also maybe slightly scared about what is possible now with satellite data, but maybe we can unpack that in another session. Yeah. Ben, working with NASA, you must have got a really interesting gauge of just where Australia sits around some of the technology capability. Yeah. Where did we surprise you in terms of our capability versus, say, NASA or the Americans?
We did a tour in January of prospective US clients, so all the kind of up-and-coming rocket companies, Rocket Lab, Astra, ABL, Phantom, quite a few, Firefly, and then obviously we were working with NASA, and then we had them come over, and there's 74 of them that joined us on our site, and they just went to work, and you can see the years of discipline come together in all different roles in their business. But in that, they also were inflexible, where I think we tend to look at a solution always with fresh eyes in Australia and trying to go, that's a bit silly, why are you doing it like that? And just cut through, to be honest, the bureaucracy of bureaucratic, I guess, momentum that they've just carried through from the 70s. And we would just, why are you doing it like that? Like, you can do it with way less equipment, or you can do it with way less people. So it's more of a process innovation type stuff that I think we jump on very quickly and easily with the framing of our minds in Australia. Just started to get a couple of questions online. For those in the audience, we will start to pass around a microphone soon, so I encourage you to start to think about any questions you've got for our speakers. But one of the questions for Catherine, which I think is a good segue or dovetail, is what can Australia do to improve its competitive position globally when it comes to developing the space industry here?
That's a really good question, and one that I would say is not just an easy answer, right? So what can Australia do to improve its competitive advantage? And Ben, this is something that you've alluded to, and it has to do with the growth and the real, I'm going to use the terrible word, but newness, the nascence of the space sector. What Australia has the capability to do is use that momentum, use the fact that we're new and we're not tied up in this bureaucratic red tape. Australia also has great relationships and historic partnership with our allies. So you mentioned NASA. We obviously have great relationships with Jackson, Hayabusa, ESA, CNES, everything. So that's what Australia can really leverage, right? We're a new growing agency. Innovators, really innovative thinkers who are ready to, like ELA, like yourself, Aussies, move quickly. Don't have bureaucratic red tape, and you have great relationships. You put that together, and you really have just this. And it sounds like I'm trying to sell you a new car. I sound like a used car salesman. It's the accent. But truly, honestly, thank you. It's Canadian.
Let's get a sense of optimism scale across the group here. So 2%, let's call it 2%, not quite 2% at the moment, Australia, global space industry. 10 years' time, what do we represent?
It's when we think about what Australia represents in other areas and other targets. 2% is where we fit. It's, do we want to grow? If yes, where. And this is where you pick out your niche area and really push forward and succeed. Launch is definitely one of them where we can grow and succeed. Let's say AI, obviously AI and cyber, it's another priority area. And then we put that together and we're gonna have a real strong innovation sector. So 2%, yeah, I'm happy with 2%, but growth across other sectors.
Yep. So targeted growth, I think with the focus on spaces enabling technology for the rest of the economy. It's been really interesting.
Beautifully summarised.
I'm starting to have a look at the questions that are coming through, and we've had 5 on talent, and I'm trying to work out if that's people that just want to work for ELA and launch rockets, or it's entrepreneurs thinking about the space industry for the first time and what are the skills that I need to build. But let's start with the first one. How did you hire your last recruit to ELA?
I think your talents, and going on from that, hopefully get to that mass where there's enough of an industry that people look internally Australia first at great space jobs before they go look externally. So we don't just leak all our talent straight away. It was amazing when we were traveling through the States. At every one of those companies, there's Australian aerospace engineers working there. And so hopefully we bring back and retain that talent in Australia and create those, and that will create its own momentum as well. More locally and more at heart for ELA, in the sense of us expanding into the next launch programs we've been trying to hire. We had an interesting story kind of come up and hopefully it translates to a hire. But a young gentleman who had come over from India to Melbourne originally, in his heart he wanted to work in space. He saw what was happening here in Adelaide and decided, I'm just going to pack up, I don't have a job, I'm just going to go to Adelaide and start to show up at these kind of venues and events. He's been donating his time and volunteering at local university programs on rocketry. He just cut through with the capability as one of a really forerunner applicants. And so I just sent him his contract today for an offer, and actually, interesting, I think it was a couple of Fridays ago, he came in here, was talking around who do I talk to work at ELA, and Michael Jones, my CEO, was here, and he went over and talked to him, and then incidentally, I had shortlisted him in the CVs, and I said to Michael, I saw this guy's, and he said he met you. And so Michael said, yeah, he's a great guy, and let's have a chat, and he's probably a good guy to bring on board. And so it worked, and so
basically find ELA employees, follow them around, and eventually you'll get a job, is the trick there. We might start to pass out to questions in the audience. I think we've got a microphone travelling around. Maybe we might start at the back, but I might just do maybe one more from online before we kick things off.
He may be here. Hopefully he signs tomorrow.
Very good. Yeah, that would actually be, that could be a double-edged sword. Let's see how it goes. Yeah, let's open to questions at the back. Has anyone got a question? Fantastic.
Hi, my name's Caroline. I'm new to the industry, I guess. I work with Catherine. I'm a lawyer and I am Indigenous. I come from Queensland originally, but I guess my question is really, I've been thinking about this and I see some of the regulatory problems. Obviously, being a lawyer with an environmental science background, I've got a hydrogeology background. Working for federal government, I see the connection between the startup venture, and I particularly say this to ELA. I'm interested to know exactly what the red tape is that Catherine mentioned, because obviously, if I'm going to do some study in this area and I've got endorsement, I would really like to hear from industry regarding, we need to look at law reform. Absolutely, we're doing that in defence. I'm working on the nuclear sub stuff, but I also believe that space has probably a bit more immature, if I may use that word, regulation.
Okay, so Ben and Alyssa, it's your lucky day. You've got a magic wand. But
I know that's a long question.
You only get one wish each. And Catherine has to do all the work. So it's actually quite a good dynamic here. What is your wish?
I think alignment of state and federal legislation on environmental that translates into the Space Act would be good. We got caught up a little bit on that for the NASA launches.
Okay, and Alyssa?
Yes, mine's probably slightly different, but we actually see some legacy policies that restrict usage of technology to answer questions that can cut across. So we can provide a solution that provides an operational advantage, provides a global ESG advantage, but regulatory-wise in Australia, locally, it won't pass as being a tool to assess performance for regulatory environments in Australia. That is Earth observation analytics being used as a tool to do that. So I think there's an opportunity to even look at legacy policies that exist and opening them up to think about the future and how new technology might actually be used to both assess policies but also be utilised to provide compliance as well.
Sorry, just last thing. So you're saying basically it's environmental procedures. Anyone, whoever. But also, what about the introduction of a bill so it creates its own jurisdiction?
We've got a rule on this panel actually, which is if you use any acronyms, you have to do 10 push-ups at the end of the event. So with that in mind, answer the question about the bill.
I think it was just a clarity of, as the Space Act is fairly new, and the legislation in that calls for environmental due diligence when we're doing launches, and for that to be checked, that requires local, state assessment as well as federal against a certain different older legislation. And there's a jurisdictional kind of overlap of how much does the space agency take on board from an environmental overseer versus the local state. And we worked through it, and the agency was good for that, and the local NT, Environmental Protection Agency, we're very supportive in working through that. So that didn't become an issue, but it was just something that we had to work through as we learn.
Okay. We've got thank you for the question at the back. We've got one that's just come through online. Someone's in New Zealand, and I asked a friend in the New Zealand space industry what he thinks of Australia. He says, we're too focused on launching, not building or creating ongoing space-enabled services. Is this true or false? You're not allowed to answer this question, sorry. You can declare a vested interest later. But yeah, Catherine and Alyssa, I'd love your views, maybe starting with Catherine.
Too focused. I'm going to say I disagree that we're too focused on launch. Launch is obviously a key piece, and we're supporting it as a South Australian government and nationally as a government, but it's a key piece. But the agency, everyone's seeing the agency priority areas, and it's quite broad. I would say we're definitely not too focused on launch. We are focused on the enabling technologies. We have a national mission. We know what we want to achieve. I'd say no, not at all, and we need to act.
And I actually agree, I don't think it's too focused on launch. Launch is definitely awesome because you can tie a ribbon around it, and it's a much harder thing to promote some of the services that are and capabilities that are here in Australia more globally when they're digital and the like, and having downstream impacts that might be 3 or 4 steps away from space as well. So it's a little bit harder to actually point and say I've had an impact when we've actually utilised space products in this outcome. So that makes it a challenge. But so launch is definitely there because it's very tangible to see the progress and as well.
Cool.
And it's awesome. And we all need it. Yeah, but I think it's what's interesting, I think the supply chain's growing too. We definitely need launches because we need the stock up there to be able to analyse and deliver in solutions. But I'm actually wanting to introduce another layer there, which is around space-dependent businesses that are not necessarily in the space industry. And I think that's where going back to the growth question, I think that's where we can have the most impact for growth as well. It's going to be harder to measure direct space impacts when it's actually happening because a new mine was opened up or extra longevity was achieved out of a certain area. And so I think Earth observation products have the potential to have, again, a huge opportunity to create impact, but and it still is a priority, but it's definitely, a bit harder to tie a ribbon around.
I'd be interested. We've got a number of people that are working in corporates. We did the show of hands earlier. We had 80 or 90% of the room saying that their job is impacted by the space industry, either from someone online or someone in the room who's thinking about space data in the context of their organisation, or maybe starting on that journey and trying to navigate how to take a step forward. We've got a question in the back here we might pass to.
It's actually along those same lines. It's actually, how do we actually make space data, Earth observation data, more accessible and cheaper to access rather than the open source information at the right scale and accuracy that's needed for industries like agriculture and mining?
Osiusbiome.earth. So we saw that there was a huge gap between super duper expensive stuff, I'm probably repeating your question back at you, and free, and it wasn't fit for purpose for our clients. So we created Osiusbiome as a platform, as an environmental intelligence platform. We've made it's a regional scale as a step in. So 20-metre resolution pixels, don't be afraid of it, there's a lot of information in there. We're still getting single canopies extracted, there's so much happening in there. And then for those who want to do a deeper dive, We can do what we call a hyperlocal analysis, so you come in on a site with a lot more detail, but we can do it in a really strategic way because we've got a really great of what's happening in the general region, so then we can send out the drones to where they need to be. We don't have to do wall-to-wall coverage if you only need to go to here and here. We can be a bit more strategic in how you actually procure the more expensive information, only go where you need to go. And also with that though, I think we have seen the price of the cost of launching satellites come down and CubeSats, but I must admit, we're still waiting as well. It directly affects our business as well to make it more cost effective. We're still waiting for probably for a few more launches of satellites and a few more generations, not of our lives.
Sure, people in the room are actually that patient.
Just of CubeSat doves and stuff, and that's just a few more launches and iterations, I think, to bring that cost down. But I think the big message there is, well, come and have a chat to us. But no, seriously, we do have to be a bit smarter. When you think about a project, don't just think you have to get 30 centimetre super detail everywhere to answer all your questions. There are actually a lot of information we can draw upon to solve a question, and because we can use the smarts around image analysis and AI and the like, it means that we can actually pull out extra information that we haven't been able to pull out before just by visually assessing. I think we're on the path to it. We definitely, as an Earth observation industry rep on the panel, we're definitely loud and clear heard that from customers that we've got to work harder in that price point perspective.
And certainly something that we're seeing is just the speed of change in this industry. So one thing I'd encourage everyone to do is really challenge your mental models that you have around some of this data. And we've got a number of early stage entrepreneurs in the room that have been really clever about talking to us and Microsoft and others around what are the really exciting edge use cases that we can do with some of this technology. Not too long ago we had Shane Hawthorne from AWS, one of his global space leads here, talking about just the incredible investment that some of the service providers are making around data as a service. Catherine, before we pass to the audience, I know South Australia and several of the states are now launching their own satellites. Maybe you could speak briefly about why and what that means for South Australians and also entrepreneurs more generally.
Thank you for the plug. And it actually touches beautifully on what you've said, Alyssa. And yes, the South Australian government is launching our first satellite, Kanini, SASat-1 Kanini, named by high schoolers for competition, which is phenomenal, right? Because then you get everybody excited, I'm going to name a satellite. But part of the data, 2 sets of data, will have an IoT, so an Internet of Things, data that's going to be shared with schools, so teachers can actually, and the government in partnership with partners, industry partners, will be working with schools so that teachers can help understand what the Internet of Things is, how it benefits their students, and how that applies to everyday life. Same for governments. So our government and government departments will have access to the data to be able to think differently about what space can provide and how the data can be used to improve decision making. There will also be a hyperspectral camera on there with different band lengths, and that data will also be available. So it's South Australia's satellite. The information and the knowledge that we're going to get from looking down will be available to help change our thinking, to help get the youth, I'm no longer part of the youth, but to help get really young, innovative minds understanding what can be done and having that future thinking. Thanks for the plug.
Very good. We've got a number of quite technical but very interesting questions coming through around the different spectrum that is available for agriculture and mining, etc. We won't go into that, but I will just say there are really vibrant space communities all around Australia, and I'd really encourage any entrepreneurs either in South Australia or in our hubs in Sydney and Melbourne to just get involved in the communities. Just this week on Thursday we've got the ag tech community and the space community coming together to talk about this very topic. Like, these conversations are happening, the innovation moves really quickly, and you can almost bet that there's other people thinking about how to address some of the opportunities that you might be thinking about. So definitely get involved. We've got one more question up the back.
Hi, my name's Sarah Baker. I'm in space education, but yesterday I was at the Australian Space Research Conference, and one really interesting talk was about the Australian Space Data Analysis Facility, or ASDA, which is established at Curtin University in Western. They've trained over 1,800 people in the last 2 years. And one surprise they had was that a majority of them were government employees. So for Catherine, how many different departments would you like to train in an understanding of space data to help break through those processes?
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah. Me, from a personal standpoint, I would, and this is, yeah, so this is Catherine speaking, and I can't speak for South Australian government on something like that. That's the caveat. But from my own personal perspective, obviously I've come from a different country, a different background in medicine and research. I think it's important to have a majority, if not at least one person in every department, trained and aware, right? We have, even my mom, she knows what my job is. She knows who I am. What do we do every day in space? And I'm like, Mom, we're having this call, this conversation, right? Over the phone, on WhatsApp. That's enabled technology. So Sarah, simple answer, yes, it's important to have everybody across departments within government, Department of Education, Health, really understand the benefits of what we can learn. And if you're not aware, you're not going to benefit. But I think you might be able to answer as well.
Yes. Oh, pardon. Do you want me to? Do you have time? Okay. Yeah. So I think that's a really interesting one. I think we are going to see a lot more in this training space. One, to enable more scientists to tap into it generally, again, coming from different domains that want to integrate it. And the one thing, again, I'm probably repeating myself a little bit here, but sometimes the downstream Earth observation analytics component, sometimes it's the whole solution, and sometimes it's just one tiny part. Some of our products are being brought into really big bushfire modelling processes and big environmental constraints modelling. Sometimes it can they just need to know a little bit of an awareness about it, but definitely I think the more people who do know of its capability and how it might be relevant to their job, the better. So yeah, echoing what you're saying.
Very good. We might have time for one more question. I love your comments, Catherine, around that's often the litmus test we give to our entrepreneurs is you need to explain this so that Chris's mum can reiterate it back. It's a constant challenge, and after 7 years at Stone and Chalk, I think we might maybe be getting close. Maybe one final question from the audience? No? Very good. We went around the world figuratively and literally today, and we will pass to one more.
Just a fun question to finish off. Thoughts on Starship development? Is it overhyped, or do you reckon it's going to be a game changer?
We'll let you take that one, Ben.
Sorry, what was the question?
Thoughts on Starships development?
A few years away, still.
Why don't you explain to the audience what that is?
Starships?
Starship, Elon Musk.
What's that?
Elon Musk.
Oh, the Starship development, yes. Listen, I think Elon's doing an amazing thing in pulling and motivating an industry outside of what was stuck behind NASA, and then NASA's now catching up, and they're trying to find a way. Both defense is to bridge from defense a gap to commercial and work together. So I think that's going to pull human spaceflight conversation. It already is in Australia as well. It's an active conversation. Should we have our own human spaceflight program? And we probably should, but we should get there through the progression of safety and progression of bringing international business first. That gives us, the technology, the talent, and also then an ability to leverage off that and piggyback for our own programs. But I think I'm super supportive of it, and I think it'll get there. ELA is why are we in the middle of Northern Territory? We're close to the equator because we want to take advantage of eventually going to higher orbits. We want to take that extra spin that you get, velocity you get from being close to the equator, and take large payloads, including human spaceflight, to lunar insertion or Mars insertion orbits. And you want to be near the equator, you want to do that sustainably, so that's a big strategic hedge from an ELA perspective.
Fantastic. So I think there's a real message there in terms of just the boldness of vision. And we've seen throughout history this the ability of space to galvanise humanity and to drive so many innovations forward. And that's certainly something that we're really excited about here at Stone and Chalk and in South Australia as well. And on that note, I don't think we can wrap up without saying Elon offers you a trip to Mars as part of the first cohort. Do you go, yes or no?
I probably would, yeah.
ELA just lost one employee, just for the no.
Back in a while. I don't know.
Very
I've
good.
got 3 young kids. It's a long trip.
Fantastic. Everyone, thanks for the conversation tonight. Thanks for throwing in questions. We covered a lot of ground. It's really inspiring to see just the pace at which the space industry is moving. There's so much happening. I encourage you, if you're not already, to tap into your local communities and innovation hubs. These are topics that move so quickly. And as you heard from Catherine and Alyssa, they're really touching all industries, but particularly those that Australia's got natural competitive advantage in. So yeah, for those online, thank you for joining. For everyone here face-to-face, please do stick around for a drink, and we'll be issuing a short little survey for everyone that's online around tonight's event as well. So thank you very much, and please join me in thanking our speakers.